So it is indeed my wonderful, great pleasure to introduce to you our third keynote speaker, Diane Rasmussen Penington. Diane is a fellow of the Higher Education Academy and of the Royal Society of the Arts. She holds the permanent title of Visiting Scholar at the University of Sydney. She has been a member of several faculties, including the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at the University of Western Ontario, the School of Library and Information Sciences at North Carolina Central University, and the School of Library and Information Studies at Texas Women's University in Texas. She has worked as a systems librarian and as a corporate information technology professional. She holds a master's and a PhD in information science from the School of Library and Information Sciences at the University of North Texas and has earned a PG.Dip in academic practice from the University of Strathclyde. Diana's research focuses on information engagement, especially in online contexts. Her areas include social media, digital consumer health and information, digital photograph representation, and online education pedagogies. She has edited 2 books, Social Media for Academics, A Practical Guide, and Indexing and Retrieval of Non-Text Information, as well as co-edited Social Tagging in a Linked Data Environment. Diane has delivered over 80 presentations and published more than 40 works in prestigious LIS journals such as Journal of Documentation, Library and Information Science Research, Knowledge Organization, the Journal of Medical Library Association, and Journal of Information Science. Also, Diane has been active in leadership in professional organization and is currently the chair of Selves Metadata and Discovery Group, and previously served as the president of the Canadian Association for Information Science. Many of us know already for ASIST, she has been a director at large, chair of the European chapter, and chair of several interest groups. So we would like to ask you to help us welcome her today. Diane's current research includes identifying and stopping the spread of misinformation and disinformation about COVID-19. Her talk today is titled, as you can see on the slide, Socially Distant Selves, Irate, Insurrectionists, and One Linked Library. Are Librarians the Cure for the Infodemic? Take it away, Diane.
Okay, thanks so much, Marie, for that introduction. And that was such a great revisiting of the Elise Academy. It was just an incredible day, and it just kind of came together. It's really amazing. So thanks for that memory. So I'm going to take everyone on a big wild ride today, but I promise I will get somewhere by the end. I just think that for a closing keynote, what I really wanted to do was to give us some direction and inspiration, but also a reality check and kind of some guidance about what we can do going forward as libraries continue to evolve in the digital age. So you might remember, obviously, from January the 6th, what happened at the US Capitol. And I'm just starting there because there's a lot of things that I think, from the past year and, really the past 4 years after when Trump was president, and all of these things that led up to things at this time that kind of led up to this day, and where we were then and where we are now, and things continue to evolve. So it really does take a bit of thinking. So I would like everyone to put into the chat which one of these 3 images is real. And there's only one real one, so put in the chat if it's 1, 2, or 3. Okay, I'm getting a range of answers. Nobody believes two so far. Sorry if there's any background noise. I live near a highway and some people honking horns and so on. This was an exercise that was presented to us last autumn at the Selves Scotland conference by librarians who work for the Scottish government, and they are doing training for government employees and so on identifying misinformation and fake news. So the correct answer is one. There was a lady on a scooter riding an electric scooter in 1916. And what they talk about here is because they were talking to an audience of librarians, obviously we kind of had a better starting point than some people do. To basically, one suggestion they made was to use a Google image search and take those pictures into Google Images and find out if the results come back as to whether or not they were authentic. We can see here that it was authentic. The lady on the scooter, the double-decker bus was only a triple-decker bus in the back end, otherwise I think it would probably fall over. And you see the photo was actually a staged representation of what a Pan Am 747 thought it would look like, but they weren't actually in a plane. So there's a lot that we have to be careful of, even if we're trained information professionals. So the core problem here that I'm talking about is misinformation and the infodemic. If you read the abstract for my talk, that the World Health Organization has declared an infodemic along with the pandemic. There's too much information, some of it's correct, some of it isn't correct, and it's really difficult for people to figure out what is trustworthy and reliable. And the advent of social media has made this even worse, but we can go back to the last pandemic in 1918, where there was, you can read the backstory of this at the link that I've provided here, but basically the issue was there was somebody involved in sending this information onto the newspapers about death rates and numbers of cases and so on, and that was 100 years ago, over 100 years ago now. And so this is not anything new. We can go all the way back to, people not believing lots of stories, back all the way to, the story of Jesus Christ, all kinds of things, and depending on what you believe and what you read, you get different stories. There was a really inspirational paper in JSIST, and it came out really quickly after COVID started, and I would recommend looking up this paper. And they made this call as well that a health crisis is also an information crisis, because we don't really know anything about all of this new environment with the pandemic and the lockdown and what we're exposed to and what we can actually get to and who we can talk to, especially when we're limited in terms of we've all been sort of online for the past year and we don't have the same access to information as we used to. So that paper does a really good job of defining the terms and the issues and what we can do as information science researchers to kind of try to help move this forward. I'm going to talk a bit about conspiracy theories because they really play into the misinformation issue. They're the biggest conspiracy theory of what we would call the digital age was 9/11. And that's not to say that things didn't happen before or after 9/11, but there's still so much, even 20 years later, that people are still posting these videos and websites and things about what really happened, and the truthers who don't believe the official explanation for what happened. And this has gone on for the last 20 years until we've got to the age of QAnon, and we're still seeing these 9/11 videos and stories. And they're really difficult to interpret because some of them do seem quite ridiculous, but then there are other ones such as the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. There's a very long list of different professionals who seem very credible, who I don't know if they are or not, but they basically don't believe the story that the World Trade Center towers crashed because of the planes. They believe that it was a controlled demolition, and they feel like they have the scientific knowledge to support this. So there are a lot of things out there where this started just right when 9/11 happened, and it's been going on for 2 decades now as we approach the 20th anniversary of it. And so some of these are funny, some of them are not really funny. We all tend to sometimes believe things that may not be part of the mainstream. Some of them are weird, some of them aren't. Some people believe Elvis Presley is still alive and he might be here with me next door in Glasgow, Scotland. I don't know. Maybe Michael Jackson is still alive. We just don't know. My own mother does not believe that the moon landing was real, and she was obviously alive at that point. She believed it was fake. You can look up a lot about the Denver National Airport in Colorado in the US. That's the world headquarters of the Illuminati. The Freemasons built it. It's going to be where the New World Order has been organized, and all of the strange murals that appear in the airport are clues about how the world is going to end. And the murals are a bit weird. You can see one over there on the lower right, and there's one on the top that has the Freemason symbol, and it actually says in there something about the New World Airport Commission. And so people have sort of made this into perhaps more than it is, but we don't really know. The issues of chemtrails, where people believe that when you see an airline go past you in the sky and you see the emissions from the plane, that those are actually dangerous chemicals that are out to kill us all and depopulate the earth. By the way, George Floyd's death was fake, according to some people. According to these people, on May 17th, there was a tweet from Barack Obama himself saying that proves that his killing was a hoax. And this was actually covered in the New York Times, where they were saying this is, they weren't promoting this themselves in the New York Times, but they had a big report about all the misinformation that was going on social media, and saying that, yes, according to social media, George Soros is to blame for all of the Black Lives Matter protests, and George Floyd is actually alive, and all kinds of stories about what he's really doing now. And of course, when somebody said just a few days ago that Donald J. Trump is still the president, it must be true, right? Because it's on this video site. And by the way, these video sites like BitChute and Patreon and so on are places where things that you won't find on YouTube, basically. So all these conspiracy theories, alternative ways of thinking about the world will appear. And so some of the comments about this is, saying Joe Biden is a traitor, Trump is the president, and I'm loyal to him forever, the election was rigged, and back and forth, and people insulting one another and so on. So there's, a lot of this going on that you won't always find these immediately if you go to sort of the big social media sites, but you can certainly find them. One of the biggest sources I think of when COVID-19 misinformation and conspiracy started was this film called Pandemic. And this came out, or parts of it came out early last year when things were just getting started. And this guy who's known for being an anti-vaxxer and a conspiracy theorist interviewed this Dr. Judy Mikovits. And she had been discredited and sort of not allowed to do research anymore and completely just disconnected from the scientific communities. And they actually wrote a paper about this. If you look at this over here in a journal where they were saying, well, Dr. Mikovits is part of our problem that we're facing because people are starting to believe fake science, because all of the things that she was saying and this was getting spread around. And so how do we deal with this? That she sounds credible because she's a molecular biologist, etc. But she was really part of despite all the attempts on YouTube and Facebook and so on to try to delete the video from their platforms, it got saved and spread around really quickly to lots of sort of dark corners of the internet where it exists. This one is one of my favorites. According to this patent database, according to the conspiracy theorists, that Microsoft has applied to patent the mark of the beast. And this is because the publication number of the patent application ends in the number 060606. So clearly there's a connection here, right? And you can see Microsoft is one of the applicants, and the title is Cryptocurrency System Using Body Activity Data. So some of the conspiracists have led themselves to think that there's some sort of nanotechnologies that are present in the vaccines that they're putting into us so that they can track what we spend and what we do, and they'll have complete control over our bodies, and Bill Gates is behind it all and the whole thing, right? So that one is just quite entertaining. But we also have to think about that maybe not everything, some of it is obviously pretty weird, but not all of it is, that so we have to be careful, because if we read, for example, on the left-hand side, it was talking about how there is an ingredient in, I think it's especially the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines that has a certain chemical that people do have an allergic reaction to. And that's true, but it's extremely rare, just like the blood clots they've been talking about are extremely rare. But if we read the woman on the other side of the screen, this was another Barchian video, she talks about that same chemical and basically how all of it is just, it's going to basically destroy the health of everyone who gets the injection. It's not a rare allergic reaction. It's toxic for all of us, even though it's a chemical that is commonly found in lots of products that we use every day. So be careful of your sources. So we look at how this spreads on social media. Well, it's easy for people to do this because if it's really quick to just click the share button or the retweet button and post about it, and lots of times people don't even read it, but they benefit because they get the sort of the happiness of getting likes and comments and attention from their friends, and so they do it. Some of the research that I've done with one of my students and has also been going on is the issue of bots and misinformation spreading on Twitter, that bots will just kind of retweet things that might have a certain word or a certain topic, but they don't look at the source or what it's actually saying, but they retweet it, and then people see what the bots have posted and then they retweet it without thinking. And the issue of how Facebook users selective exposure to what we see on Facebook. And you should know this yourself if you're on Facebook at all, that you'll see that you only see certain friends. You might have a list of hundreds of friends or however many you have, but there's a few that you only see on a regular basis. And that's because they select information to show us based on who we seem to interact with the most, what content they think will appeal to us the most based on previous things that we've interacted with, and so on. So this also means that it creates that filter bubble, the echo chamber that we talk about, where it will create the truth for you because people want to see information that agrees with their worldview. So this is it Facebook's fault because they're just trying to get people on their site? Is it our fault for accepting it? I don't know, but this is one thing that's contributing to the problem. Just a little bit of early research on COVID-19 misinformation. This is from my colleagues at the Social Media Lab at Ryerson University in Canada. And they've basically started to classify different types of misinformation. So fake tests, speculation, scams, rumors, racist remarks, and obviously we've seen that recently with the shooting of the Asian women and so on. And so these are some of the things that they were starting to see last year that was coming out from kind of some of the initial social media posts related to COVID. And I'm not going to go through a lot of these in detail because these are all sort of works in development, but just to show you that there are some studies coming out like this that we need to continue to watch for different kinds of platforms and different kinds of sharing and creating more evidence about the sort of vacuum that is created by social media. But so it has to be used in a sense that it can be helpful, but maybe it can also be dangerous. And so we have to kind of think about that as individuals as well as information professionals. Vaccine hesitancy is something that I'm working on currently. There's some recent research about vaccines for influenza and HPV vaccines here in the UK. And a lot of it has to do with their information needs aren't being met correctly. They can't find the health information they need about making choices for themselves. And this especially applies to people who speak a first language other than English, or just have a sort of an emotional response to the whole thing. And so there's implications here for how the messaging should be provided to encourage people to sign up for the vaccine. And you can see different sources about this as well. The one on the sort of the upper left there is a friend of mine. This was just from this morning, reporting that she had her second Pfizer vaccination, saying she's fine. Her arm doesn't even hurt. And then right below that post on Facebook was one of the little Facebook notifications talking about the safety of COVID vaccines right along with what she said. And the conversation, if you haven't seen that site before, is a very reliable source from academics and researchers who write things in ways that lay people will be able to relate to, so they're not overly technical, but they are reliable. So this was one article, for example, that talked about that particular issue of vaccine safety. So then we get to the idea of post-truth. This was the post-truth era is not new to COVID, but it is something that they started to say was, 2015, 2016 with the Brexit vote, the election of Trump, with all the populism that was coming out around that time. And basically the idea of post-truth is that facts are not as influential as emotion and personal belief. So if you believe very strongly that, I believe that Joe Biden is a traitor and a crook and Trump's the right person for us, then the facts won't matter, because that emotion, that belief, and that way of seeing the world is what's the most important to you. So it's become more difficult to combat facts with emotion because of the various things, mistrust in government and so on that's going on. So according to a philosopher that wrote about this, is that we can't, if people believe they know the truth, it's hard to get them to believe the truth if it's their truth, right? So we can't change the truth. If we don't know anything about it, we can teach against it, but we can't tell someone to believe something else what they already believe. It doesn't work. And so that this idea of facts being less important than epistemology is something we're going to come to at the end of this. And the issues of cognitive bias are important. So regardless of whatever biases we have that we bring to big issues that the world is facing, it influences our reality and what we believe, and therefore what we're going to do in response to it. So if we're going to refuse to wear a mask, we're going to refuse a vaccine, whatever it is, those cognitive biases are just inherent in our thinking and our beliefs, and you can't do much about it. From a cognitive psychology point of view, again, this is that same idea about information appealing to us through emotion rather than facts and science. And we all saw this through, I can't ever forget the bleach disinfectant episode with Trump and the news thing, right? So are we led to believe that there's a photo of a disinfectant from Tesco, which is my usual grocery store here in the UK, or are we going to look at the NHS, the BBC, World Health Organization if we're in the UK? Like, what is really going on? And this how our cognition operates will influence how we adjust what we believe when facts are presented to us. So different things within our cognitive structures in our brains will sometimes allow us to say, okay, yeah, I can see the point there. I'm gonna, and then you change your mind about something, but other people, no, I'm not gonna believe it, that's not true. So the issues of conspiracy theories has been, the research around conspiracy theories has been growing, I've seen just in the past few years, because we've been able to see that the spread of these conspiracy theories has become more and more serious. They're starting to harm our health. Obviously now in the pandemic they are. But what they've been looking at is the psychology of people who believe in conspiracy theories, and these tend to be people who feel like they don't have control, or that they feel marginalized in some way based on individuals or based on their social groups, etc. And fear is also something that contributes to this. And again, this is coming from psychological researchers, but I think we know this as well from information science research, that we prefer information that is consistent with our own epistemologies, whether it's within our groups or ourselves, and that it speaks to our emotions. So if you're one of those people that just like, I just can't wait to get the vaccine because it means the pandemic's going to end and we can all get back to our normal lives, I can't wait to line up for it. Or if the other one's saying, no, it's going to kill us all, well, there's a big difference there, but we will find information that supports that either way. And a lot of this has to do with mistrust in government. And these people here were talking about governments that sometimes have done things that they haven't done full and transparent investigations. Some people believe that's what happened with 9/11. Some people believe that's what happened with other things in recent history, in American history. And so they don't believe they have any reason to trust the government anymore. So they will go off and find their own explanations for things. I've done some work in the past on trust and authority, and the idea of authority changing within the context of, especially with health information, so that it used to be if you needed something about cancer, you would go to the library, you would ask the librarian for something about cancer, and they would send you home with something, hopefully. But since the internet, and especially since social media has become so prevalent, we have different sources of information, and maybe someone who has the same health condition that we have might seem more sensible to talk to for yourself at the time compared to somebody who is a so-called professional because they've never had the disease. And so there are different kinds of criteria. So I've been working with the cognitive authority idea from Patrick Wilson for years, all the way back to my PhD. And the idea of what makes information trustworthy in terms of the source. But what we did a few years ago was looked at this concept of affective authority. And this was in a Journal of the Medical Library Association article about 10 years ago, that basically the information can be subjectively appropriate. It can be empathetically, emotionally appropriate, because people that have the same condition can say, yeah, I totally understand. Really sucks to have this condition. Let's stick together and support each other when we're not feeling well. And I know this myself as a member of a chronic illness communities. So just a couple of things that my PhD students and I are working on. This student is working on credibility of dementia information on Twitter, using things like machine learning techniques to predict different groups of users, as well as how that ties to user studies. So identifying different kinds of accounts that's talking about dementia information, scoring them based on the possibility of whether they are a bot or what kind of organization or person they come from, and then comparing that to people, actual users of people, caregivers of people with dementia, which is a really important thing to do. And a lot of people are saying, well, this guy looks really credible because he's a scientist, he's a doctor, but I won't read his tweets because I won't understand them. I just want to know what to do. This other student of mine is looking at videos around self-harming behaviors, so things like cutting yourself, so not suicide, but harming yourself in some way. That out of a set of 250 YouTube videos he's looked at recently, over 64 of them were from what we call non-professionals, so just a random person talking about self-harm, so not informed by professionals or support organizations. So okay, we have this, so what do we do? And who can do it? So I'm going to talk about a few different groups, and I'm going to save us as librarians the last part because we're the most important ones to talk about. So social media companies here, this got really popular last year with Trump, and they started putting these notes on his tweets. If any of you saw this, saying that they were going to allow it, but it was glorifying violence or it was promoting misinformation. And so they started putting notes on his tweets until finally, then they started taking them down, and then ultimately they banned him from Twitter forever. So so then Trump decided to go back and order that they were censoring information online, and that they don't have the right to do that. They shouldn't be censoring. And then the argument back was, well, they're a private company. They can do what they want. They have no public interest, essentially. So the question of whether they're censoring or helping comes into question. So there's things on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube here in the UK. I get these messages about going to the NHS website or going to gov.uk, which is the UK government website. Organizations in Scotland, so they're providing me with sort of local information. I'm sure wherever you are, you can probably see the same things that are local to where you are located. So is this helpful? Are they giving us the right information, or are they just censoring? And Instagram got in trouble by this when Counter Hate Group last year, because they studied how their algorithm was working and how they were intentionally posting, or they thought intentionally posting misinformation about vaccines, about COVID, anti-Semitism, QAnon, all these things, to get more people just drawn in to use the platform more. And so they called them out to say, they called it the malgorithm of Instagram, and you can read, it's a big long report with lots of these kinds of examples. And they were accused of putting profit over the good of the public. Places that claim to debunk misinformation, if you've ever heard of Alex Jones and his InfoWars website, it's kind of infamous for being at the heart of all of this. This was from last year, that they were saying that the mainstream media will hype adverse reactions to the Trump vaccine in preparation for the Gates vaccine, which is just another twist on the whole thing, and calling Trump a Zionist, and he will not be around for any elections except in hell, where that vaccine will send you. They can stick their vaccines up there, you know what. So, there's a lot of things that you have to watch out for when you're looking at things that claim to be telling you that the other information is misinformation. The World Health Organization has a Mythbusters website specifically for COVID, and it has a lot of the common things that are going on around us. And some of these, I've just pulled out a couple that are unfortunate. Adding pepper to your soup or other meals does not prevent or cure COVID. If you're a pepper fan, that's too bad. And for those of us who like a glass of wine, unfortunately, drinking alcohol also does not protect you against COVID. So take that into consideration next time you get some wine. BBC has what they call a fake news page. So it's not fake news itself, but it's stories that are trying to fight fake news. People showing people saying that I didn't believe in it originally, but now I believe that it's real. And I was an anti-vaxxer, now I'm a pro-vaxxer, and I'm really glad I got it. And so and talking about things going on in different countries. So these are things they're trying to do to combat the whole sort of situation. Different health boards that I've looked at here in the UK, which has somewhat been in relation to the work that I'm doing with vaccine hesitancy with one of the local NHS boards in the UK. Here was one that we're talking about, a local authority of health board in England was talking about how there was rumors on social media suggesting that chemicals used in lateral flow tests, which is a type of COVID test, has a high risk of causing cancer. This is inaccurate and harmful misinformation, and it goes on to explain why. However, caveat here, this is really important. In the British Medical Journal, which is like JAMA in the US, top-end medical journal, had an article from the executive editor of the BMJ saying that they felt like the government was basically blocking science, and that the government was blocking what was truly going on in terms of accurate information around testing results and accuracy of testing and numbers that they were reporting and issues around vaccines. And this is kind of a really thing to think about, because I could not say myself in any shape or form that anything written by the executive editor of the BMJ would be spreading conspiracy theories. And there were a lot of comments, because they have a rapid response option on the BMJ, which is all open access. So people who are actual physicians saying the government is blocking some of the science, not all of it, but some of it. They're getting in the way of us doing our work and getting the word out to the public, and they're controlling the message. The media is controlling the message. And so do with that what you want. But for me, that's kind of a bit of a warning sign personally. There are things for journalists around how to identify misinformation and how to do their fact checking, which is supposed to be part of doing journalistic work. But I would be careful with the fact checkers, because they also have their own motives. Snopes decided to quit Facebook fact checking in 2019 because they didn't think it was having an impact within Facebook. And Full Fact, which is an independent so-called UK fact checking organization, at least in 2019, took millions of pounds from both Facebook and Google and free advertising. So is that neutral and independent if they're taking money from big social media and Google? I'm not sure. Vernon Coleman is apparently an English conspiracy theorist, a former GP who resigned years ago. And he put up, this is funny, he put up a warning about fact checkers saying that you can safely ignore every claim by someone calling themselves a fact checker. But if you read about him and the things that he's promoted, and these were some of the other posts on his website, COVID-19, the greatest hoax in history, proof that face masks do more harm than good. So is he really a trustworthy person to tell us to not listen to the fact checkers then? This is a site called Great Reject, so keeping the name of that in mind. If you're a librarian and you're trying to fact check this for somebody, what do we look for? So it talks about, it's a report from the British government, but how has it been, is it manipulated in some way? If you look at the tags on the site, it has things like New World Order, manipulation, plandemic, things that are probably should be going off in our heads and saying there's something going on here. So it becomes more and more difficult to make recommendations because of all this. And so issues around online health information seeking and use are really important to consider because these are more general studies that all happened before COVID. But again, it lines up with some of the research I presented earlier about people not looking at the credibility of a source, but they looked at it if it was basically in line with what they wanted to do. They might look more at it. If it's promoting something healthy, doesn't mean they'll do anything about it, they'll look at it. Issues around how to develop cognitive bias, work around cognitive biases when working with digital literacy instruction for youth is an issue because of all the different platforms and places where they're looking without any sort of support or instruction, and it's hard to fight that. Health boards have been viewed as more trustworthy than governments in terms of promoting social distancing. And again, the idea of reading things that confirm what we believe rather than something else is more reliable. So IFLA has guidelines that are available on how to spot fake news that we can use as librarians. Critical thinking is, of course, advocated for in teaching different types of literacies, and that's part of our job in libraries. Some specific examples: the University of Sheffield librarians have created this fake news game for their students. In the UK, we have a Facts Matter campaign led by Selves, which has been going on for a few years. There's a lot of people around the UK. If you look for these tweets, say hashtag Facts Matter, that's all part of our campaign. Inoculation theory says that, again, if we can get to people before they believe something, it has a better chance of becoming real for them or believing it rather than trying to debunk it. So they talk about pre-bunking rather than debunking. And so these are games that you can go on and play yourself or recommend to other people about fake news, and one about COVID specifically. And this was based on research done at Cambridge University and other universities in the UK around how to do this. So if you need more practical ideas, you can go to this link. This is from that the Scottish Government Librarians that I mentioned at the beginning with the 3 different images. So they've got a whole bunch of different other resources for you to look at if you want them in practice. So here I'm calling for some different areas within research, practice, teaching, and service that I think, regardless of what our role is in our field, we have to do different things to work towards this. And this is not something that any one of us can do alone, but I think that there are things that we can all do within what we teach, what we do within our daily practice, and what we research. And I think it does need to be interdisciplinary because there's so much that's been done in psychology and cognition, these other fields I've mentioned, that give us a really good starting point for springing off into further information behavior research. So now, the good stuff is what I've saved for last. My work around categorization, classification. So as Marie mentioned, I'm the chair of the metadata and discovery group here at Selves in the UK. And the idea that coming from work from Marcia Bates as well as Eleanor Roche in the cognition from back in the 1970s, that we have these categories and awareness that we use to make sense of the world. But I really believe that the uncertainty and the nature of how we're all stuck at home doesn't allow us to make sense of things the way we used to be able to do. And we used to get up and go to work and we would see something changed on our commute, or we went to a new restaurant or whatever we did. We don't do those things like we used to. And the more information increases, which goes back to Nick's point on information ubiquity from Monday, right? As this increases, it becomes more challenging to determine what sources are best because we're losing that awareness that we used to have. And so when librarians try to bring this in, then what do we do? Because we have different guidelines for various practices. So this goes back to, again, another British Medical Journal article trying to say that information about, or scientific information is being suppressed, and they believe that it's killing people. But this is because knowledge isn't neutral, right? So we get into neutrality. It's kind of my last point I'm leading up to here. There are politics around information access that we have to deal with as librarians. This is for those of you who remember anything from cataloging class, hopefully it's something. An authorized subject heading in the Library of Congress subject headings is illegal aliens. And this one has been challenged for a while. It was challenged during the Trump administration and said we need to change this wording. And they went to Congress and the request was denied. And they said, we're keeping illegal aliens as an official authoritative term. our professional codes tell us to avoid bias, to maintain our personal beliefs, but to not bring them into our practice and not to interfere with providing access to whatever it is that our institutions or our users want. We are committed to neutrality and impartiality, and that we need to be consistent with our descriptions. And even though our standards are biased, and so we have to work to make them more inclusive, this cataloging code of ethics is something that it's a project I've been on the committee on for the past couple of years, and I'd encourage you to read more about that if you can. There's a link there for you. So Gary Radford, are you here? Going back to his work in 1992, where he talked about the evolving library and this positive approach to librarianship and libraries, and how we can't keep going on like that forever, that certain texts and with certain facts, and a librarian will be impersonal, get them for you, and that's our job. That's not going to be sustainable, is what he was saying, and this was in 1992. And we go into 2020, an article that cited him in the journal Documentation said, well, some of our tasks are non-neutral. Like if we're fighting censorship or even just recommending something, a source, we have to have a balance between neutrality and non-neutrality. So we can't make these calls. So they call it for what they call a virtue ethics approach, which they think kind of is in between. So for example, we would have an inclusive collection development policy, but that we would also have a policy limiting us as an institution, as a library, or as individuals on behalf of our institution going out and being politically active. And so that's a way to possibly draw the line. So the most important thing here for me, though, was from 2020, from Yvonne Eden at UCLA, who said, well, how do we deal, for example, with conspiratorial researchers or people who research conspiracy theories in whatever way, whether they're members of the public or actual scientists, that how do we lead to a more nuanced understanding of information seeking as epistemically diverse? And I think that's a really important point, which leads to Penington's new model of professionalism for one linked library, or POL drops. So POL is the acronym for the title, and drops is for the 5 points that I've put together here, which I think, in my opinion, obviously, gives us some guidance about how to manage all this. So I think it involves these 5 points: developing lifelong critical thinkers, respecting and incorporating diverse epistemologies and cognitions, opening awareness of multiple facts and opinions, providing both neutral access and inclusive discovery tools, and finally, supporting 21st century literacies, which, as we know, there are many that we need to be supporting. And so this is just a quote from 2 quotes, one about the new technologies where as this goes back to what Nick was talking about on Monday, the decentralization of information and the end-to-end decryption of social media will make us immune to any sort of moderation or any sort of intervention that we can do from the social media side of things. And as those move on, it'll be harder to stop the rumors before they spread or go any further. And how are these going to be designed in the future to make sure that now we can try to rebalance what information is going out there before that technology gets to the point of no return, essentially, because of the encryption that's coming from this. And as Nick said to me directly on Monday, information access is not the same as information inundation. And I'll just play a video here because I know that was a lot. We're kind of overwhelmed. So I'm just going to play this video quietly of my dogs playing while I'm happy to answer any questions. So thanks very much for your attention.
Thanks, Diane. I'm just laughing about your video of your dogs. I think that we find out that people's attention perks up when there's a picture of an animal.
They're in every lecture I ever do, and students are disappointed if I forget a picture of them, so it's become standard for me.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, thank you for such an interesting talk.